In this video, we'll create a stunning light show using a couple of mirrors and a responsive geometry nodes lighting system. I'll show you how to set up the environment, how to create the interactive geometry nodes lighting, and finally how to fine tune our scene. So let's get started and let's get into it. So I've opened up a new Blender scene here, and we are going to start off by creating the environment first. So let's just take our cube here, hit X and choose OK to delete it and replace it with a plane. So add in a plane, scale it up a bunch, doesn't really matter how big as long as it's big enough. And don't forget to apply the scale. So hit Control A and apply scale here. Let's just add in a new cube. You know, nobody knows why we delete the first one, but hey, we do it. That's just part of the Blender lore here. Let's take this cube, pull it up and align it with the floor. By holding Control, by the way, you can snap to the grid. So that's usually an easy way of aligning things here. So this will be our mirror, and I'm just going to scale this guy up. So I'm going to scale on the Y first. So S and Y, and just make this guy a little bit bigger. Something like this will do. I think I'm going to go for a factor of 4, and let's take this guy in the top view here with numpad 7 and hit S and X to make it a little bit thinner, and something like this will do. And finally, let's go into edit mode, select the face selection up here, select the top face for our object, hit G and Z and just pull this guy up until we're nice and high, something like this, maybe just a little bit higher. That'll do. So let's just move this guy a little bit to the side here. So I'm going to hit G and X and then -6. So yeah, -6 here to the side. We will change this later on to really fit the lighting system that we create. But for now, this will work. What we want to do now is let's just name this guy mirror. So let's take our mirror and put it in its own collection. And how we do this is by selecting the object, hitting M and choosing new collection. And I'm going to call this guy mirror, super simple, and hit OK. Now we can hit Shift A, go into collection instance and choose mirror here. This will add in basically another mirror. Fun thing about this is it will take the origin point and put it at the center of our 3D cursor here. So that's an easy way of now rotating this. Is I'm just going to rotate this guy for 90 degrees. So type in 90 after pressing R, and let's just repeat this step. So hit Shift D, duplicate it, escape out of that, hit R and type in 90. All the while I'm still doing this from the top view, so I'm not getting any rotation on any other axes than the Z axis. So if you were to be like this, then make sure to do Shift D, escape, R, and then in this case type in Z as well, so you're only rotating on the Z axis, and then hit -90 on this one and it will go to this side. And you will see we now have these big gaps over here. So I'm just going to take the original mirror, which is this one over here, and I'm just going to scale this guy up until we sort of align everything. So I'm going to hit S and Y and then just scale this up until we only have a tiny gap, something like this, a tiny gap in between all of these. Control A to apply the scale, and this will be our mirror room, if you will. Also, while we're at it, let's add in a material for each of these objects. I'm just going to add in a new material, which I'm going to call mirror. And for the ground plane, let's select that. Hit new material as well, and let's call this guy ground, of course, and we should be good to go on that department. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to take the original mirror object, go into the object properties here, into viewport display, and change that to a wire. So anything inside of our room here isn't sort of blocked by the mirror object, so we can actually see anything that's inside here. Now I'm going to take the light that's in our scene here and delete it as well, and we can actually take our camera. For now, let's just delete it. It's going to be easier just add in a new one. So let's add in a new one real quick. I'm going to hit Shift A, camera. It will add it in the center there. And I think I'm going to go for a height of 1.5 here. And now let's rotate it as well. So 90 on the X, so it's facing forward like so. And if I go into camera view here with numpad 0, you will see we are now looking forward. And finally 45 degrees on the Z axis. So we are looking exactly at the center of the gap between the two mirrors. And that's what we want. And you'll see later on why we do this. All right, so we have our camera set up as well. And what I want to do next is let's actually create the two materials that we are going to need for the mirror and the ground. They are super simple, and that's why we'll create them now. These mirror objects are now not visible even in rendered view, and that's because we are still in Eevee. And if we change this to cycles, which we need to do anyway because we are using reflections and they work so much better in cycles, they are now visible again. Let's just take our ground object first and let's start working on a material. So I'm going to hop on over to the shading workspace here. With our ground object selected, let's create a material here. Now I want my ground to be almost black, so just change the base color there. Super simple stuff. We are going to add in a noise texture, take the factor and plug it into a color ramp. and take the color from the color ramp and plug it into the rough. Now I'm just gonna pull these guys in a little bit closer like so. Set the scale to be, about 10-ish or so. Set the detail to be about 10 as well, and set the roughness to be about 0.7. So now we should get quite a bit of contrast on these areas over here. And you will see we get some reflections, and we also get some rough parts as well. I might increase the detail a little bit more, even to 15, and the scale a little bit more as well to 12. So I think this works pretty well. I do think that the reflections are too strong though. So what I'm gonna do instead, I'm gonna take the black color and make that, slightly less black, so dark grayish, and I'm going to take the white color as well and just make that ever so slightly not white. So now we should have a nice reflective surface, which is not completely reflective, and also on the rough parts it's not completely rough, so that's a bit more natural. All right, so something like this will do nice. I'm just going to pull this rough part in a little bit more. So what we can do next is we can actually duplicate the color ramp, and let's just reset it by clicking on this arrow over here and then resetting the color ramp and taking the factor again, plugging it into the color ramp and taking a bump node, take the color and plug it into the height of the bump node and take the normal and plug it into the normal. Now this will add some normal data, and I'm just gonna take these guys in as well. And actually, you know what, let's just use another noise texture for this as well. So I'm just gonna go delete this link here. And by the way, if you're not sure how I just did that, by holding Control and right click and drag, I can actually delete the link there. Now that's a node wrangler feature, so make sure if you want this function, go into preferences, into add-ons, and in this case look up the node wrangler add-on, make sure that's enabled. For this noise texture up here, let's go ahead and change some of this as well. I'm gonna take this into 20, this into 10, this into 0.6, just randomizing things a little bit. I want to make sure that this looks reasonably different from the rest of the texture as well. So set the strength to about 0.1 so it's nice and soft. All right, so let's select our mirror object next, and let's create a mirror material. Roughness, set it down to 0 for now. Metallic all the way up, and there you go. It's a mirror. It works. Now, I do feel that even a mirror is not completely reflective. That's the mirror material all done. Next up, we want to create our interactive lighting system. So I'm going to hop on over to geometry nodes here, and I'm going to add in a new object to work with. And in this case, I'll add in a plane again. And let's go ahead and work on our geometry nodes lighting system. So I'm going to hit new here and delete the group input because we are not going to use it. We'll use some of the same techniques that we also used in the raycast video. And if you want to watch it, it's up here after this video, of course. So what we are going to do is we are going to take a mesh line first, which we'll use as the instance points. So let's take an instance on points as well. And let's just take our mesh line here and plug it into the group output. All right, so what we have here is the mesh line. And in this case, it's going up for 10 meters. So it basically generates 10 lines going up 1 meter per line. I'm going to set this to 5 for now, and I'm just going to plug the instance on points in between. This will effectively remove the mesh line from our view here, but we are going to replace it with a curved line, and we are going to plug this into the instance of our instance on points node. Now this will look basically the same, and that's because it's also a line going up 1 meter. So let's set this to 0. Let's set the start point to -1.5, which will create lines going to the side here, and the end point to +1.5. So now we have a couple of these lines going on. We can increase the size because we need this to sort of fit this scene overall. So I'm going to go for -3 and maybe 3 here as well. So these are the actual instances. And what I want to do is I want to create 4 sides of these, sort of like a cube, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a transform node and a join geometry node, take this guy up here and take our transform node and take the instances and plug it into the geometry there and plug this into the join geometry over here. And we'll do this 2 more times. So all right, so now we have 3 transform nodes and the actual instance on points. Let's combine this input together. So shift and right click and drag over this to actually combine all of these connectors together. And before we do anything else, what I want to do is I want to add a translate instances node. So there it is, translate instances. So yeah, let's go and just move it on the X from -3 as well. If I start rotating some of these, you will see something's happening. So let's just go and take this and rotate it 90 degrees. Same here, just take it 180. And on this guy, let's take it to 70. So I'm going to go and I want to create a gap here as well. So I think -3.1. So we now have a basic shape created out of these curved lines. What I want to do next is want to create meshes for these. So I'm going to go and take this and plug it into a curve to mesh node. Take another curved circle here. and plug that into the profile curves. Set the radius to 0.02 or so. Let's see if that works. Yeah, 0.02 looks fine here. And make sure to enable fill caps so it closes off these end points here. So this is our curve to mesh. And finally, let's add in a set material node. And I'm going to add in 2 materials now while we're at it. So 1, 2 with our light object selected, by the way. First one is going to be called lights, and second one is going to be called something like plastic or so. And for this part, let's take the plastic material. We'll get into why we do it like this in just a bit. And finally, let's take another join geometry node. For now, I'm just going to disable all of my mirrors. We have all of these curves already, and we are going to take them and actually take a skill instances node, plug the join geometry into this one. And for now, let's just disable this here and take this skill instances and plug it into this join geometry node. Now I want to scale all of these along the y-axis, effectively making them smaller. So if I go into top view here, maybe a bit hard to tell, but over here you will see that I can actually scale all of these lines. I'm going to go and set this y scale to 0.95, just making them ever so slightly smaller than the curves up here. And that's something that we want because I want the insides of our lights to be just a little bit smaller, making everything look more realistic. When we are adding the materials, you will see exactly why we do this. Now let's take this into a curve to mesh node as well, with another curved circle. So just take both of these nodes and duplicate them. Click this in between here. We can disable fill caps on this one and set the resolution to, I don't know, 3, doesn't really matter. Just set it to a low number so it's not extra geometry that we don't need. And in this case, let's set the size to be very, very small. So 0.001. And basically that makes them invisible, but they are still here. They're just very, very small. Yep, there they are. And this will basically be the actual light. Another set material node here as well. Change this from plastic to lights. And finally, let's combine both of these. And what we have now is an interior and an exterior as well. So I'm going to go and take this into shading real quick. And let's just work on these 2 materials. Now for the plastic shader, I found a very nice way to create a nice realistic looking plastic. And that's actually to combine a translucent BSDF and a transparent BSDF, and you could either add these together with a add shader, but in this case I want a bit more transparency, so I'm going to use a mix shader instead, which will give me more control. So I'm going to combine these 2 together in a mix shader, plug it into the surface, and now we can actually control the amount that we see one or the other shader. So I'm going to set this to 0.25, and if I go into render view, you probably won't really notice, but let me go over here, zoom in. So this is our material, and it doesn't look very interesting right now, but if I add in the light, you will see perfectly why this works really well. So if we now select our lights material, and in here, I'm just going to go and set the emission color to be white and set the strength to be about 250 or so. And there you go. Now you see why this works. So it has enough transparency that it makes the light come through. However, it also has this translucency, which really gives this effect of, see-through, sort of see-through plastic. And as well, this is why we also scale the insides to be a little bit smaller than the outside. And that's because we now have these endpoints here where there's no light and they sort of fade out, and that really adds to the realism of one of these light beams going across. However, if I go back to geometry nodes here into render view, and if I hit play, there's nothing going on. I'm just creating a bit more space to work with here, and I'm going to add in a delete geometry node. Now what this does is basically give us a toggle to actually delete some of this geometry here. Now I've added it to the bottom half because the top half is basically the outside. It can just stay there. We don't need to delete that. We just want to turn on and off these lights, and by deleting them, basically we are turning them on and off. So what we can do is we can take a random value, set this from float to Boolean, and take this output and plug it into the selection out. Now, if I change this here, you will see, okay, one side gives us all of these lights and the other side will give us just 0 lights. Now, what I want is actually for this to change, and you will see it just either one or the other. So no lights or all of the lights. To actually fix that, what we need to tell Blender is that all of these curves are actually separate. And we can do this by adding in a realize instances node and just plugging that in between here. I can now disable some of them and turn some of them on. And this is what we'll use to actually generate the effect. So with our random value over here, let's take a value node, which we'll use to bake in our sound, and let's take a map range node. So let's take the value from our value node, plug it into the map range value there, and take the result there and plug it into our random value. Now, For here, let's just pull up a timeline window, go into frame 1, hover over the value node and hit I. This will create a keyframe which we can use to actually bake our sound to. I'm just going to hit Control Tab in this window to switch to the graph editor, and over here with our value node still selected, go over to the key menu and hit bake sound to F curve. So I have the sound over here and it's just a snippet that I got from some audio I found online. However, just add in any sound that you want, it still works. I'm just going to use this one here and I'm going to hit bake sound to F curves. So this will generate our music here, and you will see that things are starting to respond now. So if I play this back, things are happening and it's looking pretty good. But you will also see that at the high points, it's actually black. So the lights are not showing up, and that's not correct, right? So over here where there's no sound, they're all on. And over here where there's a lot of sound, they aren't on at all. And that's why we added in the map range, because we need to invert this value basically. So the from min from max is the original input, and that's mapped from 0 to 1. So that works just fine, because we have a probability that works from 0 to 1 as well. But we need to flip it. So instead of 2 min 0 and 2 max 1, we need to flip these two values. So set the 2 min to 1 and the 2 max to 0, and you will immediately see that on the parts where there's a lot of sound, everything is turned on, and over here, nothing is turned on. And now if I start playing this back, the sound increases, lights are turning on, everything starts blinking based on the amount of sound that we are getting in our scene here. All right, so that works perfectly. We can now re-enable our mirror objects here. If I go into camera view in the layout here, you will see that we have something going on. And especially when all of these are turned on, everything will look super dope. So I'm gonna take the camera here, go into the camera properties and change this from perspective to panoramic. Now I will use the Fisheye Equi Solid, which is the default it goes to. Change the field of view to be 360. And I want to change this lens size to make it so that we don't get any of this drastic curving on the edges here. So I'm just going to zoom this guy a little bit in. Something like this will do. All right, so 12 works perfect. Now I'm also going to go into the world settings and change this to be completely black so we don't get any light bleed from the world going in here. Also, a very important step is I want this to be rotated, and I want this to be the size of our mirrors there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mirrors actually and just scale these guys down. So let's just hit S, line these up a little bit closer like so. And before we continue doing this, we are going to take our geometry nodes object here, go back into geometry nodes, and finally add in a transform node. There you go. Set the Z rotation for this transform node to be 45. So giving this nice 45-degree angle towards all of our mirrors, which will make it look way more interesting. If I go into side view here, or front view actually with numpad 1, you will see that these are all the way down. So I'm just gonna move them up ever so slightly. I think 1 meter will do just fine. Actually, let's go 0.5 there. Our lights are looking pretty dope. They are responding to the music. Might be a bit hard to tell in the preview here, but everything seems to be working just fine. The final steps to make everything look interesting, I'm gonna add in another cube here, scale it up a bunch, set this to be a wire in the viewport display as well. Hit Control A and apply the scale. And in this case, I'm gonna add a volume, remove the principled BSDF, go into volume here and add in a principled of volume. There it is. Set the anisotropy to 0.6, the density to a very low number, something like 0.1, and set the color to be a nice bluish tint. All right, so what you'll notice right now is that we get some nice haze around all of these. So if I set this to be maybe 0.3, we get a little bit more haze around all of our lights, and I think that makes it look visually interesting. And I can also increase the blueness of this, you know, just changing the overall color of our thing here. And one of the final things I did is actually to change the color of the light. So I'm going to go and make this slightly blue as well. You can also animate this value. What I did is I took some points in the music, which I think really enabled a light change. And let me just open up a timeline. And I'll do this a bit dramatic just for, you know, showcasing how this works. But over here, I can just hit I while hovering over this emission value and go 1 frame further, or even if we want a slow transition, I could go over a couple of frames, and, you know, change this to be completely red and hit I again. Now what this will do is if I go over here, everything starts, you know, blinking, doing stuff, boom, and then it goes to red. Final thing I want to do is I want to actually rotate the camera. I think this really adds as well, and just really the final touch for this awesome effect. Let's just go over to frame 1 with our camera selected here. I'm just going to hit I and choose rotation. Now let's open up this window over here. And what I want to do is I want to go to the last frame here. And in this case, I'm going to add 1 full circle and I want to rotate on the Z axis. So it's only rotating there. So over here, let's click. Let's make sure we are not deleting the 45 degrees. You're going to type in +365 here and just hit enter. And now hit I, and what we'll get is a full rotation, but it's also speeding up and slowing down because that's the standard interpolation for our keyframes. I don't want that, so over here in the timeline, let's hit T and choose linear interpolation, as always, to create a nice constant motion for our keyframes here. So now here, back into render view, and there you go. So we now have a nice rotation. We have the sound effect working, and I know it really looks bad because the preview doesn't really work that well, but over here you will see it's rotating. We have the colors changing, and I really think we have a cool mirror effect by just adding in some basic lights which respond to our music, and that really sells everything. So I'm just gonna go into the output properties for you guys so you know what to do when to save this. So over here I got it set to full HD, 30 FPS. The length of the frame range should be the length of the music that you are using. In this case, my music is 300 frames long, so I would change it to 300. By default, I use 250 just for the tutorial, so that works fine as well. Now choose a save location of your choosing, and for the file format, I would basically say, okay, you know what? Use FFmpeg video because you want to include the sound, but you could also do that later on. So use a PNG sequence if you want. These can be quite heavy, so using PNG sequence might be safer and adding in the sound later on. In my case, I use the FFmpeg video, go into encoding, change this to MP4, of course, using the output quality of perceptually lossless. And finally, I use the AAC codec for the audio. And if you want to add in audio, I'm gonna just show you real quick. Go into video editing, make sure you're on frame 1 here, go to add, choose sound, choose whatever sound you want. So I have it over here and it will edit in automatically. All right, so that wraps up the video, and I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoyed it. I want to point out that the project file for this video is available on the Patreon. It's a bit more of a complete version than what I created in the tutorial, but all the more reason to join the Patreon, and it really helps support the channel. I want to thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It helps out YouTube find my videos a little bit better. Feel free to do that. It's completely free and only takes a sec. So thanks for watching and see you in the next one. As always, a big thank you to the following patrons for supporting the channel. Please consider becoming a patron to get full access to the Discord group, all of my project files, and much more.